you're doing very well. This is the beginning of my August vlog. Hannah's being a fool behind the camera to distract me. So if you're hearing little pitter patters of feet, the cats are playing with Hannah behind there. Oh, you can hear that probably. Welcome to the vlog. I'm having fun with vlogging again. It's so exciting. I'm excited to be sharing what I'm reading again with you. I have a couple things I want to share with you. I actually have a book that I've already finished in August, and then some things I have right now that I got from the library. Let me start with what I have gotten from the library. First of all, I have Roman Stories by Jhumpa Lahiri. Let me do the, there we go. Can you see it? Hopefully you can. I read Whereabouts last month. Whereabouts by Jhumpa Lahiri was actually my first Lahiri ever. She's one of those authors that I've been meaning to read, and I just never got around to, really. And Sarah, my bestie, read Whereabouts and loved it and recommended it to me, and it was so good. It was also strange because Lahiri translates Elena Ferrante's work, and so it was kind of this strange feeling of like familiarity with her voice, but I think it's because of like her touch as a translator in Ferrante's work. But anyway, I loved it, and so I want to be back in her world. And this is a collection of short stories that came out, I feel like relatively recently, you know? 2023, yeah. I also love, this cover is so beautiful. They're apparently quite slice of life, which was what Whereabouts was like and what I loved about it, so really stoked about this one. Then I actually just picked this one up because I feel like I remember seeing people love it. This is The Guest Lecture by Martin Riker. I'm not sure if this one is going to work for me unless I'm in a very specific mood. However, it's about a young feminist economist who is lying awake before her guest lecture the next day. And she's like wandering through her subconscious because she's like used the like mind palace method to remember her talk. I'm curious. It's supposed to be bizarro feminism, language, love, family, money, and whatever the hell it means to own or make or be a property. Curious, but not sure. I feel like it's going to be a very particular vibe for me to want to pick this up or gravitate toward it. I have Death Valley. There's Death Valley. I haven't read a Broder in a long time, and I'm really curious if I do end up getting to this one at this time, how I'm gonna feel about it, because she holds a very specific place in my head of an author that I really like. I like her strangeness, I like her voice. She goes there with her concepts, but I wonder if it's going to be an author that I've like loved in my head but haven't revisited in a while, and then I'm gonna have different feelings about her. I really want to reread Milkfed because I think maybe on a second go I already had weird feelings about Milkfed at the time, and I kind of have a feeling I wouldn't love it now. But before I revisit, I wanna read Death Valley first. I remember also there being a lot of mixed feelings on this one when it came out, so curious. I do love this cover though. I don't know what happened. Everything shut off, but I'm gonna continue talking. I believe it cut off before I started talking about Monster Leo. Forgive me for being so terrible at rolling my R's. I wanted to read this one for a moment. I actually took it out from the library once before, but never got to it. And my bestie, Sarah, recently just read it and loved it, so I have to pick it up. It's just the rules. It's a grief book, which you know I love. So I'm really curious about that one. And also it'll be good to read it because it's been kind of on my radar for quite a while. I feel like this is a 2022 release even. Let's see. Oh, it's 2023? March 2023, so it's been a minute. Now, onto what I am currently reading and what I've already read from this stack. I'm currently reading The Band by Christine Ma Kellums. This one intrigued me because I saw it on Goodreads. As you can see, there it is. And I saw reviews saying like, if you are a K-pop scholar, you may enjoy this. Or if you're like a K-pop fan, you may enjoy this. And I've dabbled. Listen, I do love K-pop. I think it's fun. I used to be an full army. I have seen BTS in concert. And so currently reading this has been really intriguing because it's so BTS coded. Like if you were like ever a fan that like learned anything about their history beyond like listening to their music, it's extremely BTS coded on purpose, and I can understand the use of them as like an example of a huge group to set a story on. I don't know if I like that element of it yet, and I also don't know if I'm enjoying kind of the portrayal of the rest of the band members. In this book, the group is called literally The Band, and they're 5 members rather than 7 in real life. But the concept is that the eldest member is lightly canceled because of a song that he releases, like a solo song he releases. And he decides to take a break from the group, is in the States, and meets this psychologist in an H Mart in LA and literally follows her home and starts living in her house. It's low-key giving self-insert because she is a Harvard-trained psychologist, professor. I don't know.
I'm sorry, this is written by
Yeah. And like the character in the book is like a professor, a psychology professor.
Oh, it's worse. I feel even worse. I'm not reading this and I'm like, why are you still reading it? To me, I'm like,
it's really compulsively readable
mad.
though. Henna is a hater from the things I've told them about it. I mean, like I mentioned, it is extremely, extremely BTS coded. Like even this photo, like if you can see here, it's a photo card burning.
Oh, sorry.
That's okay, don't worry, love. That is J-Hope. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, it just is. Like, that image is J-Hope right there. Can you see him? There he is. Like, anyway, I had this on my radar, I believe from just browsing, like, Verso's catalog. Or did, I don't really remember. I read Nathan's, from Nathan's Nook, review of this when I picked this up and was like, okay, this feels like something fun, I'm gonna grab it. But this one is another short story collection. I've like been in the mood for a short story lately by Japanese author Izumi Suzuki. It's translated by a bunch of authors actually. Sam Bett, David Boyd, Helen O'Haron, and Daniel Joseph. It was also shelved as like sci-fi, which I was like, that's interesting. And I was like, I don't remember this having sci-fi. Again, I have this thing where I think I know what a book is about and I'm fully wrong often. This is a bunch of like strange stories about women encountering or being oddities of the alien, or like not necessarily from outer space, but just alien variety. They are not the norm of society. Either they're experiencing it or they are it themselves. And they make choices that don't match what others around them would deem appropriate. I really liked the first few stories of this. I thought it was fun and strange and like a little bit, it's a bit like, it's blurb is having dark humor, and I definitely felt that dark humor toward the beginning. I just found some of the later stories were quite long and kind of ambling in a way that felt like they were not as tight as they could have been. Hi friends, a couple updates for you. First, I have nails. Okay, don't look too close, but they do look pretty good for press-ons. Can you see them? Update 2 is today I was at work in the office and I stopped by my local library to get some of their new tote bags. The library had tote bags earlier this year for $2 for like a good quality canvas tote bag, and it makes me really happy to see people out and about with them. But they released a new set of 3 for $5, but construction is heavier. It has an inner pocket and it has more printed on it. So they have this like Freedom of Information campaign that they've been doing since earlier this year. And there's 3 different options. We got 2 of the options because Henna and I wanted different ones. So Henna's says, Ignite Minds, Not Books. Very cool. And then on the other side of both, it just says TPL. This one says, The Best Ideas Are Free, which is mine. I love it so much. And they're very comfortable if you are a bigger person like me and you also struggle with finding a tote bag that is like comfortable on your larger arm. These do pass that test for my arm. So if you're interested in it in the city, strongly recommend the tote bag if you're in the business of looking for one. All right, I'm back. You're kind of precarious right now, but it's more cozy for me, so please bear with me if you're moving a little bit. And I had started reading The Band, but was not sure about it. Yeah, I think that's the last time I talked to you. So I finished it and I was pretty disappointed, I'm not gonna lie. I don't think I had like unrealistic or super high expectations going into it. I just think it bit off more than it could chew and ended up falling a bit flat in certain elements of the story. So to revisit what it's about, we're following essentially a very BTS coded K-pop group where the eldest member gets himself kind of lightly canceled based on the content of the song he releases on his birthday. It kind of awakens questioning about his background, if he's half Japanese, half Korean, and the tensions around that, as well as potential like, we're moving around, okay? In this shop, you're gonna be moving with me. He takes a sabbatical kind of without telling his members what exactly he's going to do. And he goes to the States where he meets this therapist in an H-Mart, and he mistakes her for Korean at first, speaks to her in Korean, and she's like, oops, I'm sorry, I'm Chinese. And then that conversation turns into him following her home and staying in her house while he's taking this little break. And then we're also reflecting on Pinocchio, who is this very BTS coded group producer who had a scandal before this like BTS coded group where something really bad happened to his failed girl group before this. It says that it's a indicting portrayal of mental health and public obsession, fandom, and cancel culture. The band considers the many ways in which love and celebrity can devolve into something far more sinister when their demands are unmet. I do think the book does address the idea of the transaction of a celebrity and fan, and talks about kind of sometimes what can happen when fans feel taken for granted, or in the instance of like K-pop when there's like really obsessive fan sassings, all that stuff. I think it does portray that accurately, but it does feel heavily borrowed from real life. We didn't get to explore deeply the elements of this that I think would have made it more interesting. Specifically, I'm thinking about the idea of this eldest member and his need or desire to have a break from the public eye. I actually felt like that strangely felt like not the focal point of the book, despite being kind of touted as the focal point. And then also, we did talk a bunch about this disgraced girl group and the very unfortunate circumstances of the scandal that came with them. Hannah's alarm is going off. We didn't really kind of go there in terms of interrogating the pressures that were on the girl group or interrogating like the scandal that occurred, though I don't want to spoil what did happen. The like lack of repercussions for those involved. Oh my gosh, folks, the way I've been yapping at the camera and it hasn't even been recording. I think that the writing has some strong elements. Like Christine McKellums did a good job of making this both easy to read but also feel like not just very plain prose. There was some interesting descriptions and interesting use of language. I did find there's like a form element that this author used where they included footnotes throughout the book, I think as a reference to the main character being a psychologist. And so kind of working in that academic space, having those footnotes kind of calling upon her position as an academic. Though I think sometimes it was a bit distracting and a little bit overwrought. I felt like the other members of the band, aka the very BTS coded group that the author kind of creates the story around, I felt like they read a little bit flat. And I also felt like the characters in Pinocchio, the characters that represented the members of his girl group that failed, also felt very flat, unfortunately. And because of some of the heavier discussion that comes from those characters, number one, we spent simultaneously a lot of time with them, but also not enough to make I think the conversation around their part of the story land. And then there's like this big incident at the end that I do not want to spoil if you decide to read this, that the motivation for it didn't really sit right with me, especially because we didn't go as deep as I thought we were going to in conversation about fans. I just felt like this was doing a lot, but not far enough on any of the elements that I hoped for. Overall, I felt like it felt lukewarm to me. Like it didn't feel like it had a strong enough grasp on the points it wanted to make in any of the regards that it kind of advertised itself as having. I picked up and read this in its entirety today, which is Behind You by Catherine Hernandez. I have read one other Catherine Hernandez, which is Crosshairs, I believe. Crosshairs, yes. I buddy read that with my besto Sarah a little while ago. That one was like a dystopian end of the world novel that was dark. It was heavy and it was dark, and we both enjoyed it. I've been wanting to read Scarborough by Catherine Hernandez for a long time, but I've kind of just put it off for a while. I should really get there, especially after reading this and enjoying it so much. One thing I found about Crosshairs, I find that she writes really, not heavy-handed is a bad descriptor, because I don't think that that's a negative thing. I think that there is a kind of directness to her writing. It's not rooted in subtlety, is what I found in Crosshairs, which, especially in a lot of the books I think I gravitate toward, they're more on the kind of elusive, subtle side in terms of the messaging and lesson learning that I can take from them. I think sometimes authors that do it the wrong way can end up heavy-handed, and I think Catherine Hernandez manages to be direct without coming across as heavy-handed. I started on my way home from work and finished it this evening. So this is her most recent novel, and it is following story about the Scarborough Stalker, and we're following Alma, who is a film director who is working on a true crime series that has an episode about the Scarborough Stalker. And we learn how the case is connected to her life. We use the case as like our starting point, but then we're kind of just following Alma as she grows into a person, from being a young girl into her adulthood. We're flashing backward in time to when she was a younger person, and then to her in her 40s. She has a teenage son. She lives with her wife. Her relationship with her family has kind of become estranged, and we start to see why as we understand her history. And we're grounded in her working on this series and her recollection of living through the time of the Scarborough Stalker and how the case touched her life. I found this really surprising because I thought that it was going to feel more like a thriller, but it's instead so much more about grief and trauma and the way we learn to protect ourselves as people who are raised as women, and the blame that we learn so early as part of rape culture, that we learn to place on ourselves for anything bad that happens to us. And specifically, I'm talking like sexual violence. And it's really sad and also beautiful, the way this character, Alma, learns to take care of herself and heals from trauma in part, but Hernandez is such a good way of showing kind of where it's come from and how it affects Alma in her day-to-day life as an adult who has put in work to heal but still has those remnants of those traumas from her childhood and teenage years, and how it affects her existing relationships, including with people who know her well, and also as a parent. I thought that was a really surprising and interesting component of this book, is Alma kind of trying to reckon with being the parent of a teenage son and wanting to make sure that she's teaching him the right things, how to respect those around him and understand consent and understand boundaries, amidst also finding herself triggered by those conversations, or lack of conversations, with her son. yeah, heavy read. This definitely one to check the content warnings for, but I really enjoyed it. Hi. It's been a minute. I just took a clip and I was rambling so much that I'm gonna try again. I'm in my home clothes, stained and ratty as usual, and I'm drinking ginger ale out of a wine glass, my favorite way to drink it. It's been a minute since I talked to you, but I have been reading. The first thing is I'm listening to One of Us Knows. I don't know if you're gonna be able to, will you focus? I don't know if it will. I don't think it's gonna focus, but I'm listening to One of Us Knows. Alyssa Cole had written romance prior to When No One Is Watching, but that was her thriller debut. And I remember being really impressed by the ability to kind of knock a thriller out of the park your first go at it. I just thought it was such a good thriller. I actually recommended it to a coworker of mine and she did buy it and read it and enjoy it, which felt amazing, especially when I recommend stuff to people who are not really reading much and they enjoy it. Ugh, the best. Now this One of Us Knows, is a really interesting choice from Alyssa Cole and I think is very ambitious. It's a riveting thriller about the new caretaker of a historic estate who finds herself trapped on an island with a murderer and the ghosts of her past. Years after a breakdown and a diagnosis of dissociative identity disorder derailed her historical preservationist career, Kenitria Nash and her alters have been given a second chance they can't refuse, a position as resident caretaker of a historic home. Having been dormant for years, Ken has no idea what led them to this isolated Hudson River island, but she's determined not to ruin their opportunity. Then, a surprise visit from the Home's Conservation Trust, just as a nor'easter bears down on the island, disrupts her newfound life, leaving Ken trapped with a group of possibly dangerous strangers, including the man who brought her life tumbling down years earlier. When he turns up dead, Ken is the prime suspect. Caught in a web of secrets and in a race against time, Ken and her alters must band together to prove their innocence and discover the truth of Kavanaugh Island and their own past, or they risk losing not only their future, but their life. So as it mentions in the description, the person we hear from the most in the book is Ken. And Ken is part of a DID system and has multiple alters that inhabit the same body. Ken hasn't been fronting for, I believe, 6 years prior to the moment that they kind of come back into the body, come to the front, which is, I believe, the language used with DID for when one of the alters is outward facing, perceiving, and interacting with the world. And so they truly, this is not a spoiler, it happens immediately. Ken comes to the front for the first time in 6 years and is waiting for a boat to pick them up to take them to this island. It's really interesting to kind of explore Ken and their alters in what they call their inner world, which is where inside of their head live together in essentially a castle in their own mind. Really interesting. We hear from different perspectives of the alters, but mostly from Ken. And then we're dealing with that element in terms of it's a secondary storyline, essentially, their interactions with each other, the inner world, changes in the inner world, and kind of seeing who fronts when and how they interact differently with the world. And then we also have in the outer world, outside of their body and outside of their head, we have this kind of strange story where Ken wakes up to essentially, or comes to the front and realizes they have a job working as a caretaker of this old estate. It's creepy, it's confusing, and everyone is giving her warnings, essentially, that she should leave the island. So the man who brings her over to the island, her other coworker on the island, there's just something weird about it if she wasn't as desperate as she is to keep a job. And also it's a job that kind of is relevant to her interest, which is historical preservation and conservation. She would leave, but she's desperate to have a job. She doesn't have any shelter for the system and for them as a whole. They don't have anywhere to live. So it's a fascinating kind of way to tell the story, and also have different, each of the different alters have experienced different parts of the last 6 years, but also once they get on the island, experience different parts of the island. And the title, One of Us Knows, is especially intriguing because as like a device and a thriller, to have kind of different, each alter have different pieces of information that they're either withholding or sharing within the system, really even more complicates this kind of confusing and frightening situation of being on an island with a bunch of people that they don't know. Ambitious. Hopefully, I'm hoping, I want to research a little bit more. I trust Alyssa Cole in that I think that she as an author would have researched this and treated it with care, and it feels respectful so far from my perspective, but again, I'm not 100% certain, so I'm curious to look into that more. But it's definitely engaging. I'm finding it a little bit, it's like not as easy to listen to in the way that I think like thrillers can be like plotty and kind of propulsive. I am finding it a little bit challenging because the inner world elements and the dynamics between the different alters are really, really strange. So they're very combative with each other, and Ken has lots of reasons why they can be very abrasive and inconsiderate of everyone in the system. And so sometimes the things they do, I'm like, Ken, your alters are trying to help you. Like, you as a system are trying to work together. You know what I mean? So Ken makes a lot of choices that's like challenging to watch as a reader, but it's still interesting, and I'm curious where we're gonna go. I will say the group of strangers on the island element and like that tension has taken a long time to set up and get to that point. I'm 66% in, and I feel like we only kind of recently got to this like core intrigue. And of course we have like a lot of work to do to set up our understanding of Ken and the whole DID system, all of the characters within the system, and kind of their backstory of how they ended up in the situation. But I do feel like in terms of momentum and like plotting, it's taken a minute to get to where we are. But that is what I'm listening to, and I am enjoying it. Alyssa Cole's writing, she's doing a good job of handling it. It's just like a big ask, so I think sometimes it can seem a little bit, it's like a little more laborious as a reader to keep track of everything. And then I'm currently reading Toward Eternity by Anton Her. I was really excited to get this one. I requested it and my hold came in. It has these beautiful end papers. So lovely. So I heard of Anton Her first through his translation of Cursed Bunny by Bora Chung, which was nominated for the International Booker, I think 2 years ago. But also, what is it called? It's gonna bother me. Love in the Big City by Sang-Young Park, which I believe was another Booker nominated book. I also loved that novel. And so I just was really eager to read his own work. I think the idea of translators as authors and authors as translators is really interesting, to like collaboratively work to convey a story in a different language. I like wonder how that impacts how you write your own stories and kind of your deep understanding of multiple languages, and deciding to write in one language or another is really intriguing to me. I think that's why I've been really enjoying Jhumpa Lahiri. I also started Roman Stories by Jhumpa Lahiri, but I'm very, very, only a couple pages into that. But she writes her works in Italian, from what I understand, and then translates them into English herself or in partnership with a translator. But in her other translation work that I've read, which is Elena Ferrante, she is translating from Italian to English. I just find it so intriguing, and like makes me think about like crafting stories and language and the intentionality of the words that we use. And kind of, I guess unsurprisingly, that's like a part of what we're discussing in here. I was also surprised that this is speculative fiction, but I don't have a good reason why. I think I was just assuming it would be just classic literary fiction in contemporary setting, which was silly of me, and I shouldn't have thought that or assumed that. But this is a speculative fiction work that is about artificial intelligence and the quest for immortality. In the near future, a new therapy promises to eradicate cancer by entirely replacing the body's cells with nanites, android cells that not only cure those afflicted but also render patients virtually immortal. When literary researcher Young Hun, himself a recipient of nanotherapy, teaches an AI named Panit how to understand poetry, he creates a living thinking machine. But when Young Hun mysteriously vanishes into thin air and then just as suddenly reappears, the event raises disturbing questions. What happened to Young-hun, and though he's returned, is he really himself anymore? When the scientist who holds the patent to the nanotherapy technology transfers Panit's consciousness from the machine into an android body, Panit and other immortals thrive. As they begin to replicate, their development will lead them to a crossroads and a choice with existential consequences. Yeah, it's like such an intriguing concept. Of course, very relevant. Thinking about AI a lot these days, as I'm sure many of you are too. I am finding the prose, like, it is definitely on the purpler side, the more flowery side, but I'm not finding it a slog to get through. It's just the kind of writing that I have to work with slower, but it doesn't feel laborious. It's just like I gotta go slower to really soak up all the juice of the sentences that her writes. I'm finding also some really, really beautiful passages in here. This AI in the novel, Panit, is taught to understand poetry, and poetry has kind of been a through line in all of the different people and entities we hear from in this novel. Like the importance of poetry, or the way poetry informs the way they think about the world, has kind of been threaded through the novel so far. And some of the passages are very, very poetic. Listen to this, okay? So beautiful. It's not a spoiler because we don't know who it's about. I see him as he is. I also see him as he was, him in all the ages that I knew him, from young man to old. He will always be young to me. He is the face that I am more familiar with than my own. Age cannot mar it, disease cannot ruin it. A face that is the very landscape of my happiness, my joy. I love even his frailness, what the years have made of him, and this love astonishes me. Isn't that beautiful? I couldn't get over it on the train. I'm glad that the blurb doesn't tell us too much of where we're going, because I've already been kind of shocked at where we're headed. The novel is told in parts. So the near future, the future, and then I believe the near future, the future, the distant future, and the very distant future. I am in part 2, which is the future. And we are hearing from people who have been touched by this technological advancement of nanites, so these android cells that you can essentially imbue with life, whether that is like a existing person's soul or an AI. The people who've been touched by this technology in different ways are the vessels for the way we receive this story. And so it also takes us through time. So we start from kind of the inception of this idea of a nanite and the use of it to cure disease by essentially removing the physical, biological, or should I say organic cells of a human being and replacing it with these nanites. So we start there at the inception of this idea and kind of the original testing of the idea. And through time, we see the way that these choices to pursue progress, pursue this technology, to develop the nanite technology and kind of intermingle it with AI, and then to combine the two to create physical forms with AI consciousness, how all of these choices kind of snowball into more and more marvelous and extraordinary and devastating and detrimental and violent occurrences, and the way that these technologies kind of are used for beautiful, beautiful things and unfortunately are then co-opted for violence and war and horror, really. It is making my brain hurt because it scares me, and also I am so moved by this imagined future where our humanity persists despite the organic form of our body being removed or extracted or replaced, and how fragmented the idea of a soul is. Is it your memories? Is it your breath kind of coursing through your physical form? Is it your mind? And kind of the questions of what makes a soul. Have we kind of gone too far? Also how we think of AI as a consciousness. Does AI have a soul? And then all within that, we're also talking a lot about language and the purest form of language as the way that we create stories, but in turn create the world. And in some ways, there's one person in the novel who argues that poetry and that vessel for language is the truest form of humanity. There's just lots of big questions. It's making my brain hurt, but in a good way. I'm gonna stop here. Thank you for listening, and I'll try and keep you posted a little bit more next bit. I haven't chatted to you in a hot minute for a few reasons. I've been sick the last few days, not fun at all. And then also I've been kind of busy with family stuff, things that I wouldn't typically vlog. But I have been reading, and so I'm excited to share that with you. I wanted to talk to you about an audiobook that I listened to that was very popular, I believe. Like, people were talking about it for a minute. I remember seeing it, and then I just never read it. But it's The Woman in the Library, or this guy, by Sulari Gentle. I was in the mood for a thriller, and I don't even remember. I think maybe it was on like a browsing list on Libby for my library. And I was like, oh yeah, I recognize that one. Took it out, listened to it, and like finished it quickly. What a fun ride. This is about a group of friends who get to know each other after they hear a scream in the library where they're all studying. They become this close-knit group, and after the scream they find out that the person who screamed, or that is presumed to have screamed, is murdered. And kind of there's this unraveling of their like fast friendship when it's brought to their attention that not everybody is who they say they are in their group of four. I don't want to tell you much more because I don't want to spoil anything, but it was just a really fun little thriller. I found the idea fresh and interesting, specifically the idea of like a group of people thrown together by hearing a scream, not even like them witnessing a murder or witnessing, like discovering a body, like being adjacent to a crime. I thought that it was like an interesting way to bring the characters together. And I will say, of the like believable elements, maybe that part is like, you have to be willing to kind of suspend your disbelief that this like strange moment would bring together four people in such a close way. But I did find their like friendship charming. I found the relationships that bloom charming. And it was just exactly what I wanted. Something fun and fast and light. It also wasn't very like gory or scary, which I sometimes wanted a thriller, but after reading One of Us Knows by Alyssa Cole, which was like a bit heavier, this one was like a lighter, I'd say more cozy mystery than like a thriller. And I also started listening to The Mystery Writer by Sulari Gentle yesterday, which is her more recent release. This one came out in 2022, and then The Mystery Writer, which is what I'm currently reading, came out in, TG's here, he's behind the camera, came out I think this year. But I just think her voice is so interesting. She is an Australian writer, and so both of the main characters in The Woman in the Library and The Mystery Writer are Australians living in the States, which I think is like an interesting element to add to the book in terms of like someone from a different culture experiencing the States. So that kind of gives them an off-kilter feeling already. Like they have the, not maybe full culture shock of like a first experience, like these are people who've been in the States for a second, but people who are not as comfortable where they're living as someone who's grown up there or lived there for a long time. And I think that adds like a level of, there's like uneven ground a little bit, and that's interesting as a reader. And as like background work to make the mystery element a little bit more unsettling, confusing to that character. I also read Wild Failure by Zoe Whittall. I don't recall if I've talked to you about this yet. I think I have, but just to be certain, I have read, I think, 2 books by Zoe Whittall. I read The Best of Us something. The cover is writing on a chalkboard many years ago. Frankly, don't remember it well. But earlier this year, I read The Fake by Zoe Whittall, which is like a scammer book. And that one I really enjoyed. It wasn't a perfect novel, but it was definitely interesting. And I do love books about someone who is scamming. I find them really entertaining. And that book definitely is a scammer book in that 2 different people are in a relationship with the fake, the titular fake, and she's kind of stringing them both along for different reasons, and their lives involuntarily overlap and kind of where that takes them. But yes, I read Zoe Whittall recently, specifically The Fake, and I hadn't actually heard about Wild Failure. I believe this came out, did this come out this year? No. Maybe it did, because The Fake, I think, is the most recent release before this. Yes, this one came out this year as well. And I've been really in a short story mood, as I think I mentioned in this vlog. I just feel like little morsels of something lately, and this made me feel really weird. I can't deny it. I think it is a good thing. Like, it made me feel weird because of the content and the curation of the collection being so strong, but the content itself making me feel strange. So this one is specifically curated around the theme of like loneliness and disconnected people and the pain of being lonely and the way it causes us to make messy, selfish, cruel choices, and the way people can be affected by the cruel, messy, awful choices of people that are lonely. And it was such a strong through line. Like, this is one of the, in recent memory, I feel like this is such a strongly curated selection of stories that made me feel kind of icky, but not like nasty. It wasn't like a nasty little book, because that's what I was reaching for as a descriptor, but just a book about really lonely, disconnected people and how painful that is. That's that. Then I finished Toward Eternity yesterday. I was sick yesterday and feeling sorry for myself and just not good generally. But I finished this and it really kind of lifted me from that fogginess that sickness can make me feel like when my body's not feeling good. It really like lifted me out of that and made me feel lots of different things and reflect. This is a work of speculative fiction by Anton Her, who wrote Love in the Big City. No, didn't write. Translated Love in the Big City and Cursed Bunny, both Booker-nominated books that I really enjoyed by Korean authors. I believe this is his debut novel and like first work or novel of his own, despite working as a translator for a good while. And this one really kind of bowled me over. I haven't read speculative fiction in a minute, so I don't know if it's that I haven't read this style of book in a minute, and that's why it really felt particularly impactful. But I also don't want to like devalue Her's work in this. I think this was such an interesting and kind of pretty novel in a way I didn't expect given the subject matter. But I really liked this. But let me read you a little bit of the jacket and then tell you how I felt about it. In the near future, a new therapy promises to eradicate cancer by entirely replacing the body cells with nanites, android cells that not only cure those afflicted but also render patients virtually immortal. When literary researcher Young-hun, himself a recipient of nanotherapy, teaches an AI named Panit how to understand poetry, he creates a living, thinking machine. But when Young-hun mysteriously vanishes into thin air and then just as suddenly reappears, the event raises disturbing questions. What happened to Young-hun, and though he's returned, is he really himself? A gorgeous, thought-provoking debut novel set in a world where artificial intelligence and the quest for immortality have transformed the human condition. And so the little bit I read from you is kind of the first part of the novel, but we really kind of expand from there and kind of bound forward into the future and the domino effect of that first, the idea of using nanites to replace a human form, and kind of from there onward how that like irrevocably changes our world. And it's divided into different sections based on time. So we have the near future is the beginning of the first part, and it's split into 4 parts. 5 parts technically, actually. And this is like a short book. How long is this? 200 and something pages, I think. Call it 250 pages. This is like a short book to kind of cover the amount of time and explore these kind of huge ideas of like, what does it mean to be a human, to contend with whether replications of a person are really a person, how to grapple with the fact that our humanity, though it can create these beautiful, beautiful things, can also potentially create things that could outlast us and rather their lives, quote unquote, or their existences without us. The importance of language as a vessel for creating history and storytelling and record keeping. The way this like really interesting element of this was like the argument that poetry is like proximal to our souls and like is the purest version of humanity and language. Like some just really interesting, beautiful ideas told through this story of technology that kind of takes on a life of its own and then itself has to decide and may not agree about what its purpose is. I don't want to tell you more than I can without spoiling, but it's left me thinking a lot about like the moment in time we're in and how often I feels like lately we're on like the precipice of like the next chapter of humanity. And I think often about the fact that I'm sure generations before us, including my parents, have like felt that way, and this is not like a new feeling, but how like strange it is to be living in the present knowing that what we're working with now technologically is inevitably going to grow and change and morph and transform into things beyond my imagination. I wanted to close out the August vlog because I haven't talked to you in a second about any of the books that I think I mentioned in my last clip. That is because both Hannah and I were sick as dogs the last week of August. We had some tummy troubles. Nothing that we were concerned about long term once we understood, but we had some yogurt from a family friend's farm that was like unprocessed with raw milk essentially, and our guts couldn't handle it. Number one, you have to be careful generally with raw milk. In this case, because it was someone we trusted, we didn't really think too much about having a spoonful, and it ruined us. So yeah, that's what happened there. I feel like I'm so far from you. That feels like a little more normal. Anyway, that's what's up with that. So I haven't chatted to you in a bit because of that. And then also I feel like vlogging wise, there was like a lot going on in August that I didn't anticipate, so I wasn't as chatty with you as expected. But I wanted to come on and tell you about They're There, which is one of the last things I read in August. I haven't really been keeping like a reading journal much this year, but earlier in the year I had started using this notebook to take notes on books as I went, and I want to kind of get back into doing that. It's really useful to like track how I felt about things and like new words I've written, I've learned, and I don't always like write down all the quotes that I've read or that I've loved in this. Like I'll have it in my phone, but really impactful ones you can like transfer to here, I think. So yeah, I think I want to get back into using this book some more, and I have some notes on They're here. So I had wanted to pick this up closer to when it came out, which is 2018. I think I mentioned to you, but it feels so weird that this is like now like a truly backlist book. It's not a recent book, because in my head this has been on my radar for a while, and it feels like it has been on my radar for a while, but not 6 years a while. Do you know what I mean? So it's bizarre to feel like this is from so long ago. I had taken it out I think one other time from the library, but didn't get to it. And then I saw it on display recently and was like, I should just get it, like maybe it's time. And I'm so glad I finally picked it up. This is a really heavy read, and I knew that going in, but I got so attached to these characters, and I found it's such an impressive book to be a debut. It's like impressive already, and then the fact this was like Tommy Orange's first book is really like shocking in a really, it's just so good. It's such an ambitious choice. We're following 12 different characters, and we're hearing from them in like little chapters or vignettes throughout the book. They're all connected to this event called the Big Oakland Powwow. It's going to be a meeting of lots of Indigenous people in Oakland, and they come together for a variety of reasons. They all are drawn to each other because of the powwow, but there are other connections kind of brewing between this group of 12 people that some people know and others don't. Everyone's very interconnected. So this is a book that has a key at the front of it of characters, and I'm a huge fan of that in these kinds of stories, because I truly was referring to it throughout the book. Not because I wasn't interested or finding myself confused, but to make sure I was getting like the full context of relationships throughout the novel. Another book that actually did that I really was glad had a key was Greta and Valden by Rebecca K. Riley, I believe, because in that book we were following a bunch of characters that had similar names, and so in that case I just wanted to make sure I was like associating the right name with the right person. But anyway, in this case we're following 12 interconnected lives of Indigenous or Native people is how they refer to themselves, Native people living in Oakland. In my note I wrote that it was like a kaleidoscope, because there were so many experiences that are in the same realm and have similar patterns, but have like individual points of view and perspectives and lived experiences. A big theme in this one is grappling with nativeness or indigeneity and feeling like not enough of a Native person, as well as also feeling confused about like your own place in the community and what it means to be a member of a community but feel like you don't truly belong for whatever reason it may be. And certain characters kind of shared that feeling but also had it for different reasons. That was like such an interesting connection point between all of the characters and how different and unique their perspectives on their nativeness or indigeneity felt. Also, all these characters deeply traumatized characters who are kind of doing their best with their situation and with with their trauma, they are doing their best and making choices based on what they think not as necessarily right, but is necessary. And I think there are characters that we're following that make some really tough choices, that are going to make choices that harm people, and they know that it harms people, but it feels like a need for them and something that is informed by the things that have happened to them. And I'm being vague, but I think it's really good to go into this without knowing too much about each character. Especially because the back of the book and the blurb at the back of the book lays out kind of who folks are, but that key at the beginning also really gives you an insight into the characters before you meet them. And so I don't want to kind of get too in the weeds about who everyone is. It's also about like family and the idea of family, both blood and chosen, and also not chosen, but like happenstance of family, like people who fall into family relationships for a variety of reasons. And maybe your biological parents, for example, can't support you at the time, or not in your life for whatever reason, and kind of the families that we fall into and grow to love or grow distant from. I found that like through line of the book really beautiful and heartbreaking and difficult. Who shows up for you as well in your time of need, who wants to protect you, whose instinct is to make sure you're okay, versus those that maybe feel obligated to do so. Yeah, it's really beautifully written, vivid characters, and even those with really challenging motivations, I felt like I understood them as a person and could understand where they were coming from, even when they were making messy, painful, harmful choices. Yeah, this is one to read the trigger warnings for, content warnings for, and also to read when you have the space to give it the energy that it takes to follow these characters, the energy and focus to pay attention to this novel. I'm really glad that this is not one that I read on a whim, like, oh, maybe I'll just pick it up. I think the timing of this was really right for me. And also, if possible and is accessible for you, I'd recommend reading it in a way where you feel like you can track characters well. For me, that's not audiobooks. I find it difficult to track character relationships on audio, and I found it really useful to have a physical book so it was easy to go back and forth. That's my preference. But yeah, because there's kind of a lot of different relationships going on in this novel that were important to be able to track, I feel like, to get the full picture. I loved this novel, and I didn't realize Wandering Stars was a sequel. I don't want to spoil anything, but there is a moment at the end of this book that I was crying, and I didn't get an answer on the situation, and I was like, I'm just gonna believe whatever I want to believe about this. And reading the blurb about Wandering Stars, I'm really looking forward to reading it whenever I do, but I think I need to take a break because it sounds like it's going to be just as heavy, if not heavier, than this one, because our characters are even further traumatized and have lived more difficult life in Wandering Stars. So I'm really looking forward to that one, but I'm gonna have to pick it up again when I have the mental space and the heart space to handle it. But that's there. I really enjoyed it. I highly recommend it if you haven't read it. Yeah, that's kind of all for August. I want to wrap this up. I'm feeling more in the vlogging mood in September, and I'm feeling better, so that is really helpful. Yeah, I'm having fun vlogging again, like I think I said at the beginning of this vlog, so I'm so glad if you're here and you're enjoying that, you're having a good time, because I'm having a good time too. I hope you're keeping as well as you can amidst everything. But yeah, talk to you soon.